Okay, what we're going to do now is just take you through a brief demo of creating a provider in SData. For this we'll be using the Sage Integration Framework. Sage Integration Framework, or SIF for short, is a set of helper classes that will make your life a lot easier when developing a consuming application or a providing application under SData. You can download the SIF from GitHub. We'll provide links at the end of the video. You can get both the source code there as well as the installable version of it. To use this SIF, we'll be using you need .NET 2 or later. I'll be using Visual Studio 2005 in this particular demo, but you can use any later version of Visual Studio, including the Express editions. There's nothing particular about the version of Visual Studio that's required to follow through this example. On this particular machine, all I've done is, other than Visual Studio, I've installed the SIF. And if I go over to Windows Explorer here, I've already got the URL loaded in here. Just to show there's nothing up my sleeve, I'll refresh that. You can see there's nothing listed here as an endpoint. So what we're going to be doing as a provider application is we're going to be servicing up data to SData requests. So first thing we're going to do is pop over to Visual Studio, and we're going to create a brand new project. We'll create a class library, and we'll call this class library example adapter. The name doesn't actually make any difference at all. You can call it whatever you like. This is whatever naming convention you have for your particular assemblies. I'll also rename the default class to example adapter as well. Okay. So the first thing that we want to do is to make a reference to the SIF assemblies. So I'll just go here in Solution Explorer, add a reference, and then we'll browse to the location of the SIF. Now when you install the SIF, it installs a version in the GAC, the Global Assembly Cache, which will be what is loaded at runtime, but for convenience sake there is also a copy of the same assemblies installed to C:\program files Sage assemblies SData. Now what I would point out here is if you're on a 64-bit PC, the only difference is that will be C:\program files x86 Sage assemblies SData. Other than that, there's no difference whatsoever. So for this particular demo, what we'll need is to make use of Sage Common Syndication, Sage Integration Server, Sage Integration Server Feeds, Sage Integration Server Model, and Sage Utilities. For full details of the actual classes and what's exposed by each assembly, if you refer to the GitHub repository, there's full documentation on there. So with those selected, I'll just click on OK, and they're added in there now. So first thing we're going to do here is this adapter here needs to be inherited from one of the helper classes. So it's Sage Integration adapter.adapter. So this is a base class that is exposed by the SIF. And gives you a lot of core functionality. We just need to give it a little bit of additional information. So first thing that we need to be able to do here is we're going to expose our application. So we have some fictitious application here that we're going to expose data from in an SData format. So when we expose data in SData as well, everything is based around a contract. Now that contract can be a contract that you create, or it can be one of the default or predefined contracts that we have. There's a number of them. Again, if you go onto the GitHub repository, you can find all of those contracts available there for your perusal. You can create your own contract, as I say, if you like. For this particular demo, I'm just going to use the global CRM contract, GCRM for short. This is a contract which is in common use in a number of Sage applications and has been for a number of years now, so it's a very well defined and well understood contract, so it's a nice simple one for the demo. So first thing that we need to do here is to say what our contract is and what our application is. So I'm just going to define a couple of constants here. And we'll call this application name. So we'll just call this demo app. As I say, it's a fictitious application. It doesn't really matter what the source application is for this. And another one for contract name that we're going to support, which, as I say, is GCRM, Global CRM Contract. So now that I've defined those, and you'll see I will use them later in the demo as well, which is why I've got them defined as constant strings, I'm just going to decorate this class with some attributes. So I'm going to decorate it with the application attribute. Now that application attribute is in the Sage Integration Messaging Model namespace. So we'll just import that, and I'm going to pass into that application name, and then exactly the same, I'm just going to contract, and give it the contract name. So what that's done using those special attributes is basically tell SData, or to tell the SIF, a little bit about our adapter. So we've told it our application name. That can be any name that you choose, but must be unique. And the contract or contracts that we support, we could decorate it with multiple contract attributes should we choose to do so. So that's enough to tell us the SIF that we exist. But it's only any use if we're actually going to return some data. So the first bit of data that is important is essentially metadata, endpoint data. So here we want to expose to the SIF and say we understand these data sets. A data set could be a particular database, it could be a particular file system folder, whatever you would term a data set in your own application, one unique set of data. So what we're going to do here is implement get endpoints. So I've just got to save me typing it here. Just got a little helper there which just created it. So all this is doing here, it's a public method because we need to be able the SIF will call into this. We've decorated it with the endpoints attribute. Now that particular attribute is it can only appear once in a class. But the SIF will look for that to, whenever the SIF is queried for endpoints, it will then come off to the adapter and say, well, what endpoint do you have? So it's going to call into this, and what it wants is an endpoint feed, as in a collection of endpoints. And this is SIF terminology, so you'll have a feed and a feed entry. A feed is the collection, and the feed entry is the single instance of them. So all we're going to do in here for demo purposes is we're just going to create a new endpoint feed and then a single endpoint entry. We'll set some various properties of that using the application name, the contract, the name of the data set that we have, the type of the data set is data set, and then the endpoint URL. Now the URL, there we are using another helper class, the SData URI, to help us build a URL based on some parameters. So this build local path will just take an array of strings which then builds up the path segment. I'll show you the URL that generates later on. It'll make more sense as you see it then later. Now, in a real world situation, of course, you wouldn't have all of this hard coded. You would be dynamically generating this. So you might have you'd list your data sets from a registry or some configuration file, or from some database server that you can discover. So here we're just using some hard coded ones. As I say, in a real world, you wouldn't normally do that. So that's enough to tell the SIF who we are and what we support in terms of data sets and contract. So next thing we need to do is actually register ourselves with SData or with the SIF. So for that, I'm just going to add a new class, and I'm going to create an installer class. There's lots of different ways you could do this. This is just for simplicity. So I'm just going to call this adapter installer. And if we go and look at the code, so first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to change it. By default, it's inheriting from installer. So instead, I'm going to change that, and I'm going to inherit from sage.integration.adapter installer. And again, it's just another helper class. It gives you a lot of stuff for free. One minor thing with this, the default constructor for the adapter installer is not parameterless. There is no default constructor. So we do need to give it it's one parameter. So if we pass here base, and it takes a type of adapter that it's going to be installing. So we just pass in the type of example adapter. So that's the adapter that we created earlier on there. So that's literally just so the adapter installer understands the adapter that is being installed. So now that we've done that, the only thing that we need to do is override a single method. So I'm going to override a method called uninstall adapter. So here, this is what is called by the SIF when it is actually registering with the Sage integration framework. And all we need to do here, we'll call adapter installation, which is again another helper class that's in the Sage integration adapter framework. We'll get the current adapter installation, so that will return a singleton instance of the current adapter installation. Sorry. We're then going to call the install method on that, and to that we pass in the adapter type that we are installing. So this is the same thing that was passed in the constructor. Now we could pass in type of example of adapter, but there is a property called adapter type which returns the same thing. So that's a method, oh sorry, that's a property of Sage integration adapter installer. I'm also going to pass in a second parameter here. This is an overloaded method. I don't have to, but this is quite an interesting one to point out. The browsable option, what that means is by default when we install our adapter, we are either going to be non-browsable or browsable. Now that means you might have registered with the SIF with SData itself, but by default you want to lock it down, as in a user has to go in there and deliberately enable it. So in a secure manner, you wouldn't want to be exposing your data by default potentially. So normally we'd pass in false here, which is the default if you don't specify it. But here I'm going to pass in true, just for simplicity's sake, so we don't have to go into and create any interface to actually enable it. So this means that by default this will be on when it's installed and browsable, as in users can go and request data back from the feeds. So that's enough then to to install with SData. So all we really need to do now is to build the project. What I'm just going to quickly do here is add a couple of build events to this project, just to make life a little bit easier. Because one of the things that you'll find as you start developing both providers and providers in particular, but consumers to a degree as well, is that when you make a change, the integration framework will have a cache of your adapter. So what we need to do, anytime we want to change it here, we're just going to stop the service so it'll remove that from the cache. Once we've rebuilt our installer, we will then rerun the service to start it up again. So I'll just run the build there. So as part of that, it will run those build events to stop and start the service. So there we go, build succeeded, that's what we like to see. Now if I go back over here to Internet Explorer and refresh, it's now come up with 3 pieces of information in here, as we can see. We've got our application, our demo application that we registered, the contract, the GCRM contract associated with the demo application, and our demo data set, again associated with the demo application. So now we've told SData that we exist and that we have data there. A consuming application can query this endpoint feed and discover the fact that our demo application is available there and that it serves up particular data sets and for a particular contract. So that's great. So that's enough to get us up and running essentially. So now what we're going to want to do is to actually return some data, because the user is going to want to come into this data set and actually get data out of here.